He handed me the divorce papers like they were a receipt, not the end of a marriage. I signed them without protest, no tears, no questions. Why scream when he never heard me even when I whispered? He walked away with his mistress on his arm. But when I returned, not begging but glowing, with the man he once called untouchable walking proudly beside me, he couldn't breathe. Damien's canary was having another tantrum. Its cage hung near the tall window of his office, shaking with frantic flutters and shrill whistles. I watched it for a second longer than I should have, then lowered my gaze to the folder he slid across the mahogany desk toward me. "Sign it," he said coolly. There was no inflection in his voice, no anger, no guilt, no hesitation. Just practiced indifference, the kind that made your skin feel cold even in a sunlit room. I didn't ask questions. I didn't need to. The bold letters on the cover of the folder said everything. Divorce agreement. It was printed on crisp, heavy paper. The same kind we'd used for our wedding invitations. I sat down slowly, smoothing my skirt beneath me as if the room weren't filled with tension thick enough to choke on. My fingers found the pen he'd placed beside the folder. My name, Elena, was already typed neatly on the signature line. All that was left was to sign and perform like I always did. Damien didn't even look up from his phone. The silence stretched between us, broken only by the faint sound of his birds fluttering. "She's making a fuss again," he said after a beat. "Tessa. This should calm her down." So that's what this was. Another performance. A stunt. A move in his twisted game with a girl who hadn't even graduated yet but somehow managed to turn the life I had built with him into a disposable prop. I held the pen between my fingers a little tighter, afraid they might tremble. I wouldn't let him see me shake. Not again. I signed my name. Neatly. Carefully. Then I stood, pushed the folder back toward him and reached for my bag. But as I turned to leave, I heard the sound of laughter from just beyond the glass walls. The private lounge where Damien's friends gathered like they owned the world. "She's so obedient," one of them said loud enough for me to hear. "Bet if you hand her a marriage certificate tomorrow, she'd sign that too." The laughter rose in unison like it was all one big inside joke. Then came Damien's voice, calm and amused. Even if she cried her eyes out, she'd still show up and go through with it. She always does. I didn't flinch. I didn't say a word. I just held my bag tightly and walked out. The sunlight hit me like a slap. It was sharp, bright, unforgiving, as if the world outside had no interest in softening its edges just because I had shattered. I stepped down the stone stairs in front of Damien's office, my heels clacking like a countdown. And then the tears came. Not slowly, not discreetly, they spilled out in silence, hot and relentless, blurring the path ahead. I kept walking, unsure of where I was going. I just needed to move. To escape. To breathe. I stopped at the corner across from the florist where Damien once bought me yellow peonies. Not because I liked them but because Tessa had posted about how hideous they were. It had amused him to gift me the same flowers she despised. Everything with him had become a game. Every gesture, every moment, a chess move for someone else's gaze. My phone buzzed. I reached into my bag, assuming it was another cold notification from the bank or maybe an appointment reminder from the hospital. But it wasn't. "Julian, will you marry me?" I stared at the screen for a long time. Julian. The name brought a flicker of warmth, like a candle trying to stay lit in the wind. I didn't reply. I turned off the screen and clutched the phone in my hand, not because I was going to respond, but because for the first time all day I didn't feel entirely alone. The first time Damien staged a breakup for Tessa, he posted a photo of us, arms around each other, smiling, carefree. A full 9-photo grid like teenagers in love. Except he had set the privacy so only Tessa could see it. I hadn't known then. I remember being excited, naive, even refreshing my feed, wondering why none of our friends were liking the post. I thought maybe it was a glitch. It wasn't. I learned later from one of his assistants. She didn't even mean to tell me. It slipped out while she was talking about something else. I laughed at the time, shrugged it off, told myself it doesn't matter. It's just social media. But it did matter. Because even in private he was always performing for someone else. The second time we had argued. Or rather, I had spoken and he had walked away. Left me standing in the middle of a city street, crying in the rain like a cliché. I remember my makeup running, my hands frozen, my voice too choked to call anyone. I later found out he'd taken a photo of me from across the street. He had sent it to Tessa. Look at her. She's falling apart. I really can't leave her just yet. And Tessa, I assume, must have felt powerful. The woman for whom another's world had crumbled. The third time, today he handed me the divorce agreement. I spent the rest of the day in a daze. Not crying anymore. Just quiet. Detached. Moving through my apartment like a guest in someone else's home. The flowers Damien had sent last week, orchids this time because Tessa had recently declared them elegant, sat wilted in the vase. I threw them out. His watch, the one he left on the nightstand after pretending to care, I placed in a drawer. The scarf I had knitted during our first winter together, still unworn, still carefully folded in a box at the back of my closet. I left that alone. Some things I wasn't ready to touch yet. I took a long shower, washed my face twice and changed into something soft and oversized. I didn't have an appetite, but I made tea. Jasmine. The scent filled the silence like a gentle hum. I sat on the sofa with my legs curled beneath me, cradling the mug, my phone beside me. It remained dark. Julian hadn't messaged again. I didn't blame him. We didn't talk often, not like we used to. I had pulled away months ago, unsure of what I was allowed to feel. I was someone's wife. I had been since the day after graduation. That identity, as hollow as it had become, still clung to me like second skin. But Julian, he had always been patient. Even when I wasn't. I met him through a support group for adults with communication disorders. People like me, people with aphasia. People who understood what it was like to open their mouth and have nothing come out. Julian had once stuttered so badly he couldn't say his own name without panicking. His profile name was Angel. For the first month I thought he was a woman. He didn't correct me. He barely responded to my messages at all, in fact. But I kept sending them anyway. Pictures of my cat, short videos of my garden, little voice notes with music playing softly in the background. Not words. Just presence. And somehow over time he started responding. Just enough to let me know he was there. I placed the mug on the coffee table and leaned back into the cushions. My fingers brushed the edge of my phone. I thought of opening Julian's message again. Not to reply. Just to reread it. Will you marry me? Not a joke. Not a demand. Just a possibility. I wasn't brave enough to reach for it yet. But for the first time in a long time I began to wonder. What would it be like, to be with someone who didn't expect you to perform? The Civil Affairs Bureau was quieter than I expected. No wailing spouses. No dramatic confrontations. Just the sterile hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional shuffle of paper, as if lives didn't unravel here every hour. Damien was late. I sat on the bench outside the registrar's office, clutching the folder he'd given me yesterday. It was heavier than it should have been, as if the weight of everything it meant had settled into the cardstock itself. My fingers traced the embossed edge of the agreement. Divorce papers shouldn't feel expensive. But of course Damien spared no detail. When he finally arrived, he was in a tailored gray suit, shirt unbuttoned just enough to look careless. His sunglasses perched on his head, coffee in one hand, car keys in the other. He looked like he was walking into a lunch meeting, not the end of a marriage. Traffic, he said casually, like that explained everything. I didn't answer. I couldn't, even if I wanted to. The pressure in my throat was familiar. A fist around my voice box. Aphasia wasn't constant for me anymore, but when my anxiety spiked, the words still choked themselves into silence. He sat beside me, sipping his coffee and scrolling through his phone. His knee knocked against mine and he didn't bother moving it. I shifted slightly away. He glanced over. You look pale, he said. You sleep at all? I looked at him, then looked away. He chuckled softly and muttered, all right. Cold treatment. Got it. A clerk stepped out and called our number. I stood immediately. Damien followed. Inside, everything was white and beige and emotionless. The clerk glanced up, barely meeting our eyes. Do you agree to the divorce voluntarily? She asked, looking at me first. I nodded. Has the relationship completely broken down? I nodded again. She looked to Damien, who gave a lazy, amused smile and said, She doesn't talk much, does she? He said it like a joke. My stomach tightened, but I said nothing. The clerk didn't react. She stamped the documents, handed us a confirmation slip and said, There's a 1-month cooling-off period. Come back with this after 30 days to finalize. Damien took the slip like it was a parking ticket. Got it, he said. And that was it. No ceremony. No emotion. Just bureaucracy. We stepped outside into the blinding sun. Damien held the slip up, took a quick photo and immediately began typing. I didn't have to guess who he was sending it to. I didn't have to wait long to see it either. To Tessa, satisfied? Wash up for me tonight. The words blurred for a moment before snapping back into sharpness. Damien still hadn't looked at me. He was smiling at his phone, clearly enjoying whatever reaction he'd received. Then he turned toward me, stretching slightly and cracking his neck. You know, he said, we never did go to Florence like you always wanted. I looked at him. You kept going on about feeding pigeons at Piazza del Duomo. Since you were, what, 7? He laughed like he found it adorable. Maybe we'll still go. You want to? I didn't move. He kept talking. I mean, we're technically still married for another month. Might as well get some use out of it. 3rd anniversary's coming up, right? I stared at him. He was actually trying to plan a trip. After handing me divorce papers. After sending a receipt of our breakup to another woman. Don't look at me like that, he said, brushing a strand of hair off my face. It's just for show. You know that. I didn't respond. Not because I was restraining myself but because I physically couldn't. My tongue had turned to stone. We walked back to the car in silence. He opened the door for me, even unbuckled my seatbelt when we arrived. Like a man playing husband on the cover of a lifestyle magazine. When we pulled into the driveway of our apartment, he looked over and said, "Don't be so down. It's just pretend, Elena. You're still mine." I stepped out of the car. I didn't look back. That night my phone buzzed again. It was from Julian. Tickets for next month. See you in Florence. I stared at the message. It was the only thing that didn't make my stomach turn. The tea I had made hours ago had gone cold. I reheated it in the microwave, but it tasted flat. Like everything in this house. Lifeless. The only sound in the apartment was the hum of the fridge and the soft creak of my footsteps as I moved through the space. I stopped by the balcony door and looked out at the city below. Willowgate at night was always glittering, always pretending it was something it wasn't. Much like Damien. That night I dreamed of him. Not Damien now. But Damien then. The boy who used to call me Sister Elena, with a crooked-toothed grin. The one who followed me around with his hand in mine, who plucked flowers from schoolyards to tuck behind my ear. Your eyes are so pretty. I want to look at them every day. Your piano playing makes me feel like I'm flying. When I grow up, I'm going to marry you. We sat beside each other in class. We played tag in the courtyard. We passed notes in messy handwriting. I used to save all of his. The memories melted into another. The day that changed everything. I was in his family's car, playing rock paper scissors in the back seat when the crash happened. I remember the glint of a speeding truck through the windshield. The blare of a horn. The deafening crack of metal on metal. My mother's scream. Then fire. I had been the only one to survive. My parents. My younger brother. Even the little puppy I had named Clover. Gone. After that I couldn't speak. Not because my vocal cords were damaged, but because my brain had shut down the part of me that could. I developed trauma-induced aphasia. The words were still in my mind but they refused to leave my mouth. I would open it and nothing came out. For months, Damien never left my side. He sat beside me in silence. He taught me how to count again. How to pronounce words. How to ask for water. How to say my name. When I couldn't sleep, he read to me. When classmates whispered about the mute girl, he punched one of them in the hallway. He had been everything. No. He was the man who humiliated me for another woman. Who kissed my forehead and handed me divorce papers in the same breath. I woke up before sunrise, curled tightly under the blanket, my hands clenched around my pillow. The sheets were soaked with sweat. My throat ached but I hadn't made a sound. I sat up slowly, reaching for the water on my nightstand. My phone lay next to it, still unlocked. The message from Julian glowed faintly on the screen. See you in Florence. I traced the words with my eyes, then pressed the lock button. I wasn't ready to respond. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I might be ready to leave. I met Julian through silence. That wasn't his name back then, of course. His username in the group chat was Angel. Pink cartoon bunny as the profile picture, no bio, no introduction. For the first 2 months I thought he was a woman. And in a way it didn't matter. People with aphasia don't always seek conversation. Sometimes we just want someone who doesn't expect us to perform. Someone who doesn't rush us, interrupt us, or pity us when the words get lost in our throats. So I sent Angel small things. A photo of the lemon tree I'd been trying to keep alive. A voice note of the piano piece I hadn't touched in years. A short clip of me feeding birds in the park, no narration, just soft fluttering. At first there was no reply. Then one day a thumbs up emoji. That was it. I saved that message. Over time the responses came a little more often. Not every day and never long. A sentence here. A sticker there. But they were warm, never judgmental. I didn't know who Julian really was until nearly a year in, when I sent a frustrated voice note. I'd frozen up trying to ask a waiter for water, and I'd walked out of the cafe humiliated. I ended the recording with a dry laugh and said, "I bet you're a lot braver than I am." That night a voice message arrived. It was the first time I heard him speak. His voice was lower than I imagined. Measured. With that slight hesitation, the kind that tells you he's still working to get every word out smoothly. "You're not weak, Elena. He just got scared. It happens." I dropped my phone. I had assumed Angel was a woman for so long, I felt my body retreat before I could stop it, as if I'd crossed some invisible line. I didn't reply. He didn't message again for almost a month. But I didn't remove him either. The night after the Civil Affairs Bureau, I sat curled up on the couch, Damien gone somewhere with Tessa, and I finally clicked on Julian's name. I scrolled up through our old messages. The pink bunny stickers. The half-finished sentences. His list of childhood favorite foods, all sent without fanfare. A slow, silent kind of intimacy. A memory surfaced, him once saying, "Silence doesn't scare me. I grew up in it." Damien, on the other hand, needed noise. Validation. Worship. I heard it again, the laughter of his friends through the hallway walls. They were over for drinks. Tessa'S laugh filtered in from the balcony, high, nasal, rehearsed. "She actually signed the divorce papers?" Someone laughed. "Of course she did," Damien replied. "She's my puppet. I say sit, she sits. I say divorce, she signs." A roar of laughter followed. "And if you tell her to crawl back," one of them teased. "She will. Always does." I stood on the other side of the wall, wine glass in hand, unmoving. That wasn't heartbreak anymore. That was something colder. Detached. Later that night, when the apartment had gone quiet again, I opened my phone and found a message from Julian. "Thought you might need this. 1. Get your passport scanned. 2. Apply for a 6-month visa. Embassy link below. 3. Medical checkup before travel. Make sure you're cleared. 4. Sell what you don't want to take. Travel light. 5. These restaurants near where I stay, not fancy but warm. Try the lemon tarts. 6. Don't overthink. Just come." Then a second message. "If you're not ready to reply, that's okay. But I'm here." I pressed my lips together tightly, holding back whatever that ache was in my chest. Julian had always spoken like that, like he was talking to someone who might vanish at any second. Not forcing. Not chasing. Just staying. The next morning I opened the windows wide. For the first time in weeks I let the curtains flutter and the sunlight pour in. I opened the closet and began sorting. Most of my clothes were too polished, too tailored. Damien had picked them all. I set aside the designer bags he gave me, the jewelry still in velvet boxes, the blazers that still smelled like his cologne. I called a buyer. I spent the rest of the day photographing everything, posting it quietly, arranging pickups without a word to Damien. The next day I went to the hospital for a checkup. Not for anything urgent, I just needed to know. I wasn't pregnant. I wasn't sick. I was physically fine. Felt like something solid to cling to. Before heading home, I stopped at the safety deposit box Damien had given me access to 2 years ago. It held things in both our names, documents, keys, records of stocks and assets he didn't want under scrutiny. I took pictures of everything. Then I slipped the original folder into my own bag. Just in case. That evening, the apartment was empty again. I stood at the sink washing a single cup. The silence felt heavier this time, but not in a way that scared me. My phone buzzed. I dried my hands slowly, walked to the counter. It was Julian. Not a message. A call. My finger hovered over the screen. Then I answered. There was a pause. "Elena." His voice was softer than I remembered. Are you all right?" I couldn't speak. My throat refused to cooperate. I gripped the edge of the counter. My breathing stuttered. Julian didn't rush me. I took a deep breath. Closed my eyes. Tried again. Divorce. The word rasped out, barely audible. But it was there. Julian was quiet for a moment. Then, good. Another pause. Then he said it again, gently this time, not as a question but as something solid I could hold on to. Then just marry me, okay? I didn't reply. But I didn't hang up either. We just sat there on the line. Quiet. Present. Breathing. And for the first time in weeks I didn't feel like I was drowning. The airport in Willowgate smelled like old metal and coffee. I hadn't been inside one since the crash. I had walked Damien to gates, picked up relatives and arrivals, even delivered forgotten passports. But I never boarded. Not once. Not since that day. Now I stood before the gate, passport in hand, fingers trembling just slightly. Elena Collins, the attendant called. I stepped forward. Every cell in my body screamed run, but I moved anyway. One foot in front of the other. Like Julian had told me in a message just last night. This isn't a step back. This is the first real step forward. I clutched that sentence like a lifeline as I walked down the boarding bridge. The turbulence was mild. I still flinched at every dip. The elderly woman next to me noticed and offered a piece of chocolate. I shook my head and smiled politely. She didn't press. Just gave me a nod and returned to her knitting. I held Julian's last message in my lap, open to the line where he'd written, "I'll be waiting outside. Don't worry, you'll see me." And I did. He stood near the car rental kiosk, tall and straight, wearing a navy coat with the collar turned up against the wind. His hair was darker in person, his jaw more defined than I remembered from a few grainy video calls. In his arms, a small bundle of fluff. A puppy. When I approached, he looked up, eyes immediately meeting mine. There was no awkwardness. No hesitation. Just warmth. "This is for you," he said, lifting the puppy slightly. "Her name's Clover." I blinked. Clover. My voice cracked on the second syllable. He smiled. I remembered. "You mentioned the name once." My chest tightened. That had been my dog's name. The one lost in the crash. I'd only ever said it in one of my very first messages to him, 2 years ago, in a text buried in a long paragraph of pain and nothingness. "You remembered that?" He shrugged lightly. "I remember a lot of things you probably forgot you told me." Julian's apartment wasn't extravagant, but it was flooded with natural light and the scent of basil. There were wide windows, quiet walls, and warmth that didn't need to be spoken aloud. "I'm gone most days," he said as he unlocked the door. "But the puppy's good company. You'll have space to breathe." And he kept his word. He didn't hover. Didn't interrogate. He gave me the password to the Wi-Fi, showed me where the tea was, and then stepped back into the background like he'd always lived on the periphery, waiting to be let in only when invited. I took long walks that week. The cobblestone streets of Florence looked like paintings. Tourists everywhere, but I liked that. It made me feel anonymous. I visited bookstores and tried pastries with too much cream. I sat on benches in the park, feeding birds quietly and letting Clover nap against my thigh. The language barrier was still there, but Julian had been right. There were plenty of Chinese families in the area, and slowly I began to practice the basics again. One afternoon he handed me a coffee while I sat on the terrace. "Have you ever considered working again?" he asked, casual but direct. I hesitated. Damien said I'd embarrass myself. Julian didn't flinch. "I'm not Damien." I looked down. "You don't have to do anything," he added. "But I think you're capable of a lot more than you give yourself credit for." He was right. I didn't believe in much, but somehow I believed him. That evening I opened a neighborhood app. A woman named Alessia was looking for a tutor. Her daughter spoke Mandarin at home but struggled with confidence. I sent a message. The next day I was hired. I didn't even tell Julian until after the first session was over. "She's 7, I said over dinner. "Loves dumplings. And her favorite word is chaos. But she can't pronounce it right yet." He looked up from his plate, surprised. "That was fast." "I didn't want to jinx it," I said. "But it felt easy." "You smiled just now," he said almost in a whisper. "I think it's the first time I've seen that in person." I blinked. I hadn't even noticed. Days passed like that. Peacefully. I taught 3 times a week. Julian worked long hours, sometimes coming home with ink on his fingers or tired lines around his mouth. We didn't talk about what he did and I didn't ask. In the evenings he would bring pastries or a new tea to try. Sometimes we didn't speak at all. Sometimes we just sat in the same room, two quiet people who had survived the worst of themselves and now found comfort in silence. Then one afternoon he walked in with a plain envelope. He handed it to me without a word. Inside, a simple form. Marriage registration. Already partially filled. I looked up sharply. "Before you panic," he said, raising both hands, "I just wanted to ask, today or tomorrow?" I blinked. "What?" "We're already doing all the hard parts. We might as well have the certificate." "That's not how people usually." "I'm not people." I stared at him. He didn't look smug. Or overconfident. Just hopeful. Calm. No pressure. No demand. Just an invitation. I should have said I needed time. Instead I whispered, "Tomorrow?" We went to the city hall early the next morning. It was a narrow building with ivy creeping up its sides and a faint scent of old wood and lavender inside. The man officiating the registration spoke quickly, in French first, then Italian. I understood none of it. Julian just smiled and kept nodding. I followed his lead. At the end, the man stamped something official and slid 2 papers across the desk. And that was it. We were married. No rings. No photos. No vows. Just 2 people standing side by side quietly saying yes. That evening we sat on the couch, Clover curled up between us. Julian leaned back, arms behind his head. Still breathing. "Barely," I joked. He laughed. "Good sign." We didn't talk about what it meant. Not that day. But later that night I caught myself humming in the kitchen. Something I hadn't done in years. Of course, peace doesn't last without consequence. By the end of the week my phone began buzzing non-stop. Notifications. Screenshots. Group messages from people I hadn't spoken to in ages. "Did you really run away and marry someone else? What's going on between you and Damien? Elena, look at this, he just posted a photo with Tessa and tagged you in it." And then a trending post. A blurry image of me and Julian walking outside a cafe, puppy in my arms. Is this the stolen bride? She was his childhood sweetheart. Cold-blooded betrayal. Damien deserves better. I stared at it. My finger hovered over the reply button. Then I locked the phone and turned it face down. Julian walked in just then, hair slightly wet from the shower. "Something wrong?" he asked, drying his hands. I shook my head. "Nothing that matters anymore." He raised an eyebrow. "I'm learning," I said softly, "what peace feels like." "You don't have to come," Julian said as he folded a suit jacket into a travel bag. I stood by the window, fingers wrapped loosely around a mug of lukewarm tea. The late afternoon sun streamed into our apartment, casting soft shadows over the floor where Clover napped peacefully. "I know," I said quietly. He glanced over at me, waiting. "I want to." That was all it took. We flew out the next morning. A private flight, arranged quietly and efficiently. Julian said he needed to finalize some legal documents for a Florence expansion. I knew that wasn't the only reason he had suggested this trip. There were things I needed to close too. I hadn't seen Willowgate in months. The last time I stood in this city I had been invisible. A ghost in my own marriage. A mute in rooms where everyone screamed over each other. But stepping onto that tarmac again I felt nothing. Not fear. Not longing. Just quiet. Like I had buried the last version of myself here and I was only coming back to collect the headstone. Julian had gone directly to his office branch. I took a car to the hotel he had booked for us. A restored estate near the Central Plaza. Everything smelled of aged wood, fresh lilies, and something warm I couldn't place. As I stepped out of the car my phone vibrated. Unknown number. I declined the call. It rang again. I declined again. Then I blocked it. Before I could take a step forward, a voice rang out behind me. "Elena." I turned slowly. Damien was standing by the fountain near the hotel's grand steps, phone in one hand, face flushed. Afraid. Like someone who hadn't slept. Hair too neat, clothes too tight. A man trying too hard to pretend he hadn't lost control. He stared at me like he couldn't believe I was real. "I knew you'd come back," he said, stepping forward. "I knew it." I said nothing. "Elena." I walked past him and into the hotel without a word. My phone vibrated again, this time with a message from Julian. "You've arrived? I'm on my way. Room's ready." The suite was beautiful. More importantly, it felt nothing like Damien. There were no mirrors angled to reflect his own face. No gray marble surfaces. No expensive wine bottles left unopened for years. Instead, Julian had arranged rows of dresses in soft palettes. Blush, ivory, sky blue. None of them loud, none of them designed to scream status. A team of stylists arrived an hour later. "You don't have to wear anything you're uncomfortable in," one of them told me kindly. "Just pick what makes you feel like you." That night I chose a simple pale lavender dress. Modest neckline. Flowing skirt. Bare shoulders. I didn't recognize myself in the mirror. And for once I liked that. The next evening I received the address to the banquet. I hadn't expected to attend any public events, but Julian's assistant said he'd be stopping by this one, as it was hosted by an old client of his. I didn't realize until we pulled up to the entrance that the client was Damien's mother. Her birthday gala was an annual affair. The Walkers made sure the city remembered them at least once a year with wine, press, and rumors. I froze halfway out of the car. Julian wasn't there yet. The valet opened my door. I stepped out into the blur of flashing camera bulbs. Inside, the hall shimmered in gold and crystal. People dressed in floor-length gowns and sharp tuxedos milled about like they were at an awards ceremony. I was barely a few feet in when I heard my name. "Elena." Damien's voice, disbelief thick in it. He was standing near the champagne table, flanked by a few of his usual friends. Smug, sharp-suited, and always too loud. He walked toward me slowly with that crooked smile he wore when he thought he was being charming. "You came?" he asked. I didn't answer. He scanned my outfit, his expression unreadable. "You look good," he added, then lowered his voice. "I knew you'd come back. This is good. Very good." I remained still. He stepped closer. "Let's not make a scene tonight. My mother will be watching." He reached out, his fingers brushing my wrist. Before I could move away, a firm voice rang out. "Elena." I turned. Julian stood at the entrance to the hall, dark suit immaculate, hair slightly windswept from the breeze outside. His presence shifted the entire room. Even Damien seemed to register it, his grip tightening slightly on my wrist before letting go. Julian walked over, calm and composed. "Elena," he said again, extending a hand. I placed mine in his. The contact grounded me. The room around us quieted as people turned to look. At that moment, the doors to the banquet hall opened further and a steward announced, "Welcome our honored guests, Mr. Julian Reeves and his wife." A ripple spread through the crowd. Damien's face went slack. Someone behind us dropped a wine glass. Julian nodded politely at the stunned faces, then turned to Damien's mother, seated at the center table. "Mrs. Walker. Happy birthday." She looked from Julian to me and blinked. "Thank you, Mr. Reeves." Julian gently placed his other hand on my back and guided me toward the center of the room. He didn't hesitate, didn't glance back. When we reached the table, he pulled out a chair for me and said in front of everyone, "My wife prefers quiet celebrations, but she insisted on being here tonight." I looked up at him. There was no smugness in his expression, just quiet pride. Mrs. Walker opened her mouth, then closed it. Damien stormed forward. You married her?" The entire room turned to watch. Julian didn't flinch. "Yes." "Elena," Damien said sharply. "Are you serious?" I stood. My voice trembled only once. "We're already divorced, Damien. Have been for a while." He opened his mouth to interrupt, but I continued, louder this time. "I'm legally married to Julian Reeves. I have no remaining ties to the Walker family." His friends stared. His brother looked away. Damien's eyes searched mine like he didn't understand the language I was speaking. Julian stepped forward, pulling a small handkerchief from his pocket. He wiped the hand Damien had touched. Fully. Deliberately. "Elena values peace," he said calmly. "And I protect what's mine." He turned to Mrs. Walker, who was still frozen in her chair. "I trust there will be no further confusion about Elena's status or our marriage. I'd appreciate it if your family refrains from contacting her moving forward." Mrs. Walker nodded slowly. "Of course." Julian placed the cloth down on the table, took my hand and nodded politely to the room. Then we walked out. In the elevator, I finally let go of the breath I'd been holding. Julian glanced over, one brow slightly raised. "You okay?" "I think so." He chuckled. You did well. I didn't plan on making a scene. You didn't, he said. They made one by assuming you were still their possession. I smiled faintly. He looked down at our joined hands, then kissed the back of mine. You look beautiful when you're free. The elevator stopped with a soft ding. As the doors opened, a familiar voice echoed from the hallway. Elena. We turned. Damien stood just outside, face pale, eyes wide with desperation. Julian immediately stepped in front of me. Is something wrong? He asked coldly. Elena. Damien started. I reached past Julian, pressed the basement button, and just before the doors closed, leaned into Julian's side. He looked down, then tilted my chin and kissed me, right there in the open. The doors closed before Damien could speak again. And just like that, the conversation and the past was over. By morning, the banquet was trending. Not the gowns. Not the food. Not even the chandelier that had once belonged to an empress. But me, the mute ex-wife who remarried the billionaire in silence. Clips of Julian wiping Damien's touch off my wrist were everywhere. People praised his elegance, his restraint. Others replayed my single sentence over and over. I'm legally married to Julian Reeves. I have no remaining ties to the Walker family. It was like the entire city had finally looked up and realized I'd never needed to scream to be heard. Damien, on the other hand, couldn't stop talking. He posted the next day, a black and white photo of him and Tessa captioned, "Some people change. Some just reveal who they really are." The comments were merciless. You mean like when you called her your dog at that cigar lounge? Didn't your someone special just get kicked out of school for bribery? Is that the same ex-wife you cheated on? Twice. Then came the leaks. Screenshots. Videos. Chat logs. Not from me. From those in his circle who had finally had enough of the arrogance. Someone posted a voice note, grainy but unmistakably Damien's voice, laughing. She'll crawl back. Always does. That girl can't even speak for herself. That was the beginning of the end. Julian found me on the balcony that afternoon, phone abandoned beside my tea. You all right? He asked softly, rubbing Clover's ears as she climbed into his lap. I nodded. He's unraveling. Does it feel good? I thought about it. No, I admitted. It feels clean. Tessa'S scandals exploded not long after. A former professor anonymously confirmed she had submitted a thesis lifted from an online forum. Another student shared private messages of Tessa soliciting favors in exchange for editing help, many of which involved money and connections to Damien. The university launched an immediate investigation. Within days she was expelled. Publicly. Damien's last post was a black screen with the word, betrayed. No one cared. I never responded to any of it. Not even when a journalist emailed asking for an exclusive. Not when Damien's mother sent a courier with a box of jewelry and a card that read, "He's not the same without you." I handed the package back unopened. I met with a lawyer. Finalized every remaining tie, the apartment, the shared assets, the bank account that Damien had once said I could use for nail appointments. I wired every last cent back to him. Then I blocked his number. So he didn't stop. Late night calls from unknown numbers. Flowers delivered to Julian's office. A letter left in the hotel lobby, begging for 5 minutes just to explain. Julian never reacted. Never stopped me from reading them. He just made sure the hotel changed our floor code and installed a temporary security detail. The final blow came when I released the recording. I didn't do it for revenge. I did it for the women watching. The ones still stuck in rooms like the one I had once sat in, mute and small while laughter echoed around them. It was a voice memo Damien had sent to a friend the day after the Civil Affairs Bureau visit. It's hilarious. You should have seen her. Signed the paper like I'd told her to bake a pie. That girl doesn't even blink without my say-so. Watch, she'll cry for me in a week. I attached it to a single caption post. Survivors don't always scream. Sometimes they walk away. It went viral in hours. His family revoked his trust fund. His company's board pushed him out of his ceremonial role. Sponsors and PR firms dropped every campaign with his name attached. Meanwhile, I walked through open-air markets with Julian, eating grilled peaches and drinking cold elderflower soda. I picked up teaching again. Not just tutoring but offering aphasia-friendly language workshops with a local foundation. I bought new books. Burned old letters. Julian took me to the coast one weekend. We rode bicycles to a tiny harbor where he taught me to tie knots with seashells and wire. No one whispered behind my back anymore. No one asked me to be anything but present. Then came the final attempt. We were leaving Willowgate, our return flight scheduled for early morning. Julian had just helped load our luggage into the car. Clover was tucked in her travel carrier. The driver opened the back door and I stepped out into the cool, drizzling air. And there he was. Damien. Soaked to the skin, kneeling on the sidewalk just outside the terminal entrance. "Elena," he gasped. "Don't go. Please. Please." Julian stepped forward instantly. I held up a hand. Damien's eyes were bloodshot. His suit looked crumpled, his hands trembling. "Just listen," he pleaded. "1 minute. You're the only thing I ever did right. I lost everything. I know. But I swear I'll fix it." I walked forward slowly. The rain soaked into my sleeves. My hair stuck to the sides of my face. Damien stared at me like I was salvation. "I never meant to hurt you," he whispered. "I was stupid. I was drowning and I dragged you down. But I remember who you were, Elena. And I remember how it felt when you loved me." I crouched slightly, lifted my hand and reached toward his cheek. His eyes widened with hope. Then I wiped a smear of mud from his face. And said clearly, calmly, "You are filthy." His expression shattered. Julian took my hand. We walked away. In the car, Julian didn't speak. I leaned my head against the window, watching raindrops chase each other down the glass. That was it. Not the end of Damien. But the end of his shadow over me. I used to think silence meant absence. The absence of sound. Of answers. Of being enough. But Florence taught me something different. Here, silence wasn't a punishment. It was space. To breathe, to heal, to speak when ready. We returned a week after Damien's final attempt. Julian didn't ask about it. He simply took my hand as the plane lifted off and let his thumb rest on the back of mine until I closed my eyes. Clover barked joyfully when we unlocked the apartment door. The curtains swayed in the late summer breeze. The kitchen still smelled faintly of basil and thyme. My favorite mug was waiting near the sink. It wasn't just a return. It felt like stepping back into belonging. The next morning I resumed tutoring. Alessia ran into my arms with a shriek and declared that chaos was now her favorite word in both Mandarin and Italian. Her mother kissed both my cheeks and handed me a basket of fresh figs and pastries. "We missed you," she said softly. I smiled, truly gently, and meant it. That afternoon, Julian walked in with an armful of books. "Don't say anything," he warned playfully. "Just accept my love language." He piled them on the table. Memoirs, poetry, even a slim volume on baking with lavender. "I thought we could build your library here," he added, shrugging. I touched the cover of the first one, On Quiet Courage, and nodded. I started writing again. Not fiction. Not even full essays. Just little reflections typed on a borrowed laptop. Memories. Fragments of thoughts. My silence wasn't passive. It was armor. Some betrayals don't need revenge. Just distance. There's power in choosing not to explain. Julian found them once and bookmarked a few. I didn't mind. One Saturday evening, while he chopped vegetables for dinner and hummed something off-key, I reached over and adjusted the heat on the stove. "Too low," I murmured. He grinned. "We're fighting over soup now. It's official, we're domestic." Clover barked at our feet. I rolled my eyes. "Next we'll be arguing about laundry." "We already do," he pointed out. "You fold like an origami crane. I fold like a raccoon in a windstorm." I laughed then, a full chest-deep sound I hadn't heard from myself in years. On Wednesdays I volunteered at a small therapy center. It catered to adults relearning language, not just speech but expression. Emotion. I sat with a woman who hadn't spoken since her stroke. We colored together for 30 minutes before she whispered her daughter's name. I almost cried. She gripped my hand like I'd given her something precious. It was a Tuesday when Julian returned from a short trip with a paper bag tucked under his arm. "A gift," he said. I opened it and froze. Inside was a scarf, soft blue, slightly uneven in stitching with one corner knotted badly. I had made it. Back when things were worst. During the long nights Damien left and I stayed trying to knit my grief into something useful. I never finished it. I never gave it to anyone. "You found this." I asked. It was at the Willowgate apartment, he said. Behind a drawer. I held it to my chest. I kept it, he said, voice gentler now. Because even your sadness made something beautiful. That night I dreamed of rain. But not the kind that soaks you. The kind that washes everything clean. A few days later a letter arrived. Handwritten. No return address. Just my name. I knew the handwriting. I sat on the balcony as the sun dipped low and opened it. I'm not asking you to come back. Or to forgive me. I just want to say, I remember the girl who spoke with her eyes. Who waited for me at every finish line even when I didn't deserve it. I remember the hands that held mine when I was no one. And I'm sorry for how I treated you when I became someone. I know now that I wasn't angry at you. I was ashamed that even when I had everything, you were still more whole than me. Ed. I read it once. Then I struck a match, dropped the letter into the bowl beside me and watched it turn to ash. That evening Julian joined me on the balcony. The sky stretched wide and golden above us, dipped in lavender and flame. The city below softened into quiet. He wrapped the scarf gently around my shoulders. You kept it, I said, surprised. I fixed the loose stitch, he added, tucking a corner into place. We sat like that, close, quiet. Then he turned, pressed his lips to my temple and said, "This is what silence sounds like." I didn't speak. I didn't have to. The invitation came in a pale cream envelope, stamped with a logo I recognized from years ago. The Lindale Language Therapy Foundation. They were hosting a global awareness event in Willowgate. And they wanted me there. Not to give a speech. Not to perform. To be. A symbol, perhaps. A guest whose silence had once made a louder impact than words. I placed the envelope on the table and walked away. That evening, Julian was trying to fix a broken drawer in the kitchen when I handed him the card. He read it. Then looked up at me. What do you want to do? I don't know. He set the screwdriver down. Then you have time to decide. I decided the next morning. Not because I owed Willowgate anything. But because I didn't owe it fear anymore. We arrived the day before the event. Julian booked the same hotel. Same suite. Familiar but no longer haunting. Clover had grown since last time. She jumped onto the bed and immediately claimed the softest pillow. We laughed. We didn't talk about Damien. Or the banquet. Or the letter I had burned. That chapter had already closed. The event hall was filled with soft music and quiet voices. People from all over. Educators, therapists, writers, survivors. I wore a soft blue dress. No makeup. Just the scarf Julian had once rescued from the bottom of my grief. He stood beside me as guests walked by, some nodding, others stopping to thank me. A young woman touched my arm gently. I read your post, she said. The one about armor. I shared it with my mother. She hasn't spoken since my father died, but last week she smiled at me. I blinked back tears. Thank you, she whispered. I nodded. I spotted Damien before he saw me. He stood near the back, unshaven, hands in the pockets of a too large coat. No entourage. No spotlight. Just a man whose edges had finally dulled. His eyes met mine across the room. He didn't move. Neither did I. But later, as the crowd thinned and the lights softened, he stepped outside. I followed slowly. He didn't say my name this time. Just looked at me with the kind of tired that no amount of sleep could fix. You look well, he said, voice low. I said nothing. He nodded. You don't have to speak. I still said nothing. Then he looked at me, really looked. The way he used to when we were teenagers, sitting on the hood of his dad's car, before money and noise and cruelty had buried everything good. Are you happy? I didn't flinch. I met his eyes, calm and certain. Yes. That was all. His shoulders sank slightly, like the wind had finally left him. Good, he said after a long pause. That's good. And then he turned and walked away. No begging. No promises. No apologies. Just silence. I watched him go. Didn't cry. Didn't ache. Didn't follow. Back in Florence, I opened a new journal. On the first page I wrote, "This time I left without leaving myself behind." I launched a small program with Alessia's mother. Bilingual education for children of immigrants, especially those with speech delays or learning disorders. We named it Clover's Classroom. Julian designed the logo, a tiny four-leaf clover curled around a book. I wrote a monthly column for a small publication. Quiet essays. Some stories. One poem. Julian printed every one and stuck them on our fridge like they were Pulitzer-worthy. One evening I walked into the kitchen to the smell of burning. Julian stood with a smoking pan in one hand and an apologetic grin. I swear I followed the recipe. You doubled the pepper, I said, peeking into the pot. I was trying to impress you. I took the spatula from him. Mission failed, I said, laughing. He stepped behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. His chin rested on my shoulder. Still love me? I turned slightly. He reached into the drawer, pulled out the blue scarf and wrapped it gently around my shoulders. Then, soft as breath, he said, I love you. Even when I burn the pasta. I looked up at him, heart full, and finally said, I know. I can hear it. The end.